Welcome to Lesson 22 of Experiential Learning, Being a Good Listener at Work. I'm Eloise from Durban campus. As a recap or continuation of Lesson 21 about the communication process, which communication barriers identified in the video were also in your textbook. It would also be helpful for you to complete the activity as on page 151 to finish off your understanding of barriers to communication. These are your learning objectives for today's lesson. By the end of it, you should be able to discuss active listening skills, explain the active listening process, apply the knowledge of active listening to your own life, explain how active listening skills can improve workplace communication. As I mentioned before, you learnt about active listening when you were doing your assignment, so this should be more of a polish and refresh than new information. Let's think about listening skills. Should you make eye contact when listening? What makes you feel heard when you are speaking? Do you think about what you are going to say next while listening? Do you ask questions when you don't understand what somebody said? Consider these questions and answer them in a discussion in class. Watch this video called Being a Good Listener by the University of Life to prepare for your lecture's discussion. Or you will be shown it in class if you choose to attend. I highly recommend the channel University of Life. The videos are extremely well made and they all have solid advice. This lesson will focus on pages 151 to 154 of Chapter 4, Communication Basics at Work, in your textbook, Civin et al., 2019. Name of the book is Working Professionalism, and you should have a hard copy by now. The focus is on being a good listener at work. While the sender of a message is responsible for encoding and transmitting a message effectively, the receiver is responsible for listening. And you might think that hearing and listening is the same thing. But hearing is innate. It's something that you're born to do. If there is a sound, you will hear it. But listening is learned. It is a skill. It is something that you can develop and become better at. It's something that you do on purpose. We think faster than we speak. So a receiver is thinking while they should be listening. So it is a choice whether to pay attention to your thoughts or to pay attention to what you hear. That is a skill of listening. You will find these 5 active listening skills on page 152 and 153 of your textbook, which you should have already covered when you were preparing for your assignment. So as we have said, hearing is passive while listening is active. These are the steps which take place during active listening. First is hearing. This is the automatic response to auditory stimulus. And then attention. This is when you make a choice as the receiver of a message to deliberately filter out other stimulus and focus on the message you are receiving. Then comes understanding. This is where your brain decodes, processes, and evaluates the message. The receiver tries to understand the purpose of the message as well as its meaning. To evaluate means to check if something is a joke or factual, or is it a question, is it useful or is it not? That is part of the evaluation element of understanding. The next step is to remember. Once the message is understood, it is stored for future reference. You can use that just later in the same conversation when you refer to something that the speaker said earlier, or you can use it in your life as a helpful fact for your future. Last is the feedback phase. So this feedback can be non-verbal, including nodding and facial expressions, or verbal, which is things like agreement or asking questions. And your feedback can signal or check understanding. So to signal understanding is to confirm that you understood what is said, and to check understanding is to make sure that what you have understood is what they intended. Now, acknowledging the speaker. Active listening requires the receiver to display the appropriate reactions, because if the listener shows inattention or they show criticism, then it can discourage a speaker who may then choose to end the interaction. And in this way, for instance, in the lecture room, if the entire class is looking half asleep or staring blankly at a lecturer who asks a question, they may move on to the next topic, even though the members of the class may not fully understand the concept that was being explained. That's why it's important to acknowledge the speaker. Appropriate acknowledgement in the workplace includes eye contact, nodding, and answering questions. To reflect on this, recall a time when somebody wasn't listening to you. How did they signal that they were not listening? Did they change the subject immediately? Did they stare at their phone instead of making eye contact? Did they say yes and nod in the wrong places? And what are other appropriate ways to acknowledge a speaker? Think of little ways that you can go, which aren't really words. They're not really nonverbal, but they are encouraging. Checking understanding. When listening, you may need to check that you have heard and understood correctly. So that can be as simple as checking that you heard a word correctly or checking that you understood the meaning. So to check, you can clarify, and that involves asking questions. You could also paraphrase. So that's to repeat the idea that you understood in different words. And then you would get feedback from the sender of the message to see whether you understood correctly or not. Or you could summarize. That's when you repeat a shortened version of the message back to the sender of the message, and they can correct you if you have made any mistakes in your interpretation. Tips for active listening. Read through the tips in the table on page 154 to 155. So these tips include the do column, starting with stop talking. It's important to remain silent in order to really listen to someone when they are speaking. And then in the do not column, the very first entry is do not prematurely judge the subject matter or decide that it is too boring or difficult. After you have read through both columns, highlight, circle, star, or underline 5 items in the do column which you feel are the most important. Then highlight, circle, star, or underline 3 items in the do not column which you think you need to improve on. It's important for us to identify our areas for improvement as part of self-awareness so that we can become better people. As you know what it's like when somebody is a bad listener, it is really important for your self-development to become a good listener so that you can create a good impression and just have richer interactions with people instead of going through life without absorbing any of the wisdom from the people around you. Once you've done this exercise, compare your selections in pairs and discuss why you made the selections that you did. Lastly, reflect. Do you consider yourself a good listener? Why? Why not? It would be interesting to find out, those of you who consider yourselves to be good listeners, if other people agree with you because you may feel that you're good at listening, but because of a lack of self-awareness, you don't realize that you're actually doing a lot of the things in the do not column. So that wraps up the lesson 22. Here's a teaser for lesson 23. In the next lesson, we'll learn about organizational structures and channels of workplace communication. This was alluded to in lesson 21, where we talked about there are hierarchies of people that you speak to within an organization depending on what you need to say or what you need to find out. Okay, dokie. See you next time.